Whether Marvin Elkind, a man known as the Weasel, who morphed from friend of the mob to police informant, was chauffeuring Jimmy Hoffa, Muhammad Ali, Golda Meir, or some of the most corrupt bosses in the underworld around a block, the rules were the same. Keep your mouth shut. A while ago, Canadian award-winning crime reporter Adrian Humphreys convinced Marvin Elkind, a.k.a. the Weasel, that it was safe to open his mouth and tell his rare story, which is now wrapped in a collaborative book called The Weasel, A Double Life in the Mob. It is my pleasure to welcome Adrian Humphreys and Marvin Elkind to Studio 4 to tell us more. Well, nice to meet both of you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Same here.
I've never met anyone as close to the mob as you were in my whole life. You're the first.
And that makes me happy.
I bet it does, and I'm happy you're alive.
That's two of us.
And you too.
Yeah.
Because writing about it and living the life is dangerous, has to be.
Sure, but nothing in comparison for me. I mean, for me, it's business. For Marvin, it was a life. You know, I could go home at night. He was always on duty, always in the thick of it. Yeah.
And when did you decide to talk to him, to write his story?
Well, I was introduced to him when I was working on my first book, and I was writing about a mafia boss, and several sources said to me, if you really want to know about this mob boss, you got to meet the Weasel. He knew him as a child. He worked with him as an adult, and we were introduced, and we developed a relationship of trust, and I learned his secret that for decades he was Canada's most prolific police informant, and I realized pretty soon that his story was far more interesting than any of the other gangsters I was writing about. It took a while to get to this stage, but it just was a story I had to have.
And why did you trust him, Marvin?
And because he offered me money.
Of course he did, and you've been about money since you were a little kid. You used to like a wad of bills in your pocket.
Yeah, I did, yeah. Give me a big kick.
I'm sure. So when did it all begin for you? When you were 6, when you were 9?
When I was 9.
You got started.
The foster home that I was in, that was the way of life there. So I got started.
And you were abused?
And yeah.
By a mother, not so nice foster mother.
And no.
And what about the brothers? Now you were a Jewish kid.
Right.
Plopped into an Italian family with gang connections, or how does it work?
Well, they did. The only one that had gang connections then and kept them on was the one that I became closest to, her oldest son, Roy, who was not a bad person. He was evil, pure evil. But because of whatever, we became very close for years.
And when did you know he was pure evil?
From the day I got there.
Really?
Yeah.
So you had good intuition, some street smarts. Any street smarts then?
And street smarts, I found out you have to be born with them, and experience will make them better.
So you got better at what you did.
Yeah.
As you were following Marvin's life, what made you gasp? What shocked you?
Well, a couple of the times when he was placed in such tremendous danger or such a shocking situation that any normal person would either run, soil their trousers, or crack, and he never did. He was the quickest extemporaneous thinker that I've ever met and speaker. He even experienced undercover cops made more slips than Marvin did, who had no official training. So he was in the lion's den, quite dangerous situations with killer mafia bosses, with Mexican cartels who kill at a drop of a hat, working for the police, and he was so unflappable, always kept his cool and always kept his cover, and that's really what made me gasp the most.
When did unflappable begin for you? In reform school? Because you
What does unflappable mean? I'll tell you.
Unflappable means that you're just pretty cool in any situation. You're cool, calm, and collected. And you know what it means. You're just tricking
No, I
with
didn't
me.
really. Yeah, no, but you explained it well. It really started when I was in reform school. The first day I was there, I became buddies with the biggest, meanest, toughest guy in the reform school. And he was a good friend while I was there. And he told me that it's very good not to show any fear to the guards. And when you're strapped, don't cry. If you don't cry, he says everybody will respect you, all the other inmates. And he taught me the secret of how not to cry.
And did they think something was wrong with you because you didn't cry?
Well, the guards got frustrated about it, and that was the name of the game.
And when you got out, who befriended you?
A parole officer, female parole officer. She got me out actually 1 year prior to, but I was supposed to be there for 5 years. She got me out after 4.
Well, you got a pretty stiff sentence for something that wasn't all that bad, as I recall. What'd you do? How'd you get into reform school?
I was with a couple of other guys. They were a few years older than me, and we were breaking into grocery stores and stealing cash.
And
They
so
were stealing it. I was just a guy that they pushed through a window and opened the door for them.
you're on watch.
Yeah.
They duped him. The
They
kids
duped
duped
him.
him, and
Pretty much,
he got
but
the
it-
stiffest sentence of all
But
of them.
that's a big stiff sentence, and that's a tough reform school. That used to be a POW.
That was a very tough reform school.
I've never
was a
been
very
in
tough
reform
situation.
school, but I'm sure. Was it Fern Alexander
Yes.
you're talking about?
Yes,
The social worker
Yeah,
who helped you.
yeah, she was very good to me.
So on-the-job training in reform school. When did you get into collecting and loan sharking and driving Jimmy Hoffa around?
Well, I went to New York because of boxing when I was 18, and I soon found out quick enough that I wasn't making enough money at it. So I got a job. I was lucky enough to get a job as a busboy at the Copacabana in New York.
Right.
And at the Copa, in order to work there, it's no big deal. You had to be a member of the Teamsters. Everybody that worked there joined the Teamsters. So I did. And which everybody did that work. And a group of Mr. Hoffa's associates used to come in 4 or 5 nights a week because they had a lot of fun and they didn't have to pay. And these were pretty tough guys. It was Tony Salerno, Tony Pro Provenzano, Frankie Carbo, Blinky Palermo. And they came in and they were very loud and what you may call it, intimidating to everybody there. So other staff were scared to go to them. But they were big tippers. And I knew the type. I knew they weren't going to do anything. They were just there to have a good time. And scaring people was part of their way of having a good time. So, and I was through a lot more, so I was okay with it. So people ran from them, I ran to them. And I took care of them. And then one day, it was on a Wednesday, never forget it. I was there for 3 months. Tony Salerno calls me over, and I remember Freddie said, "Hey, little Jew boy, get over here." So I came over. I always showed it. He says, "Yes, Mr. Salerno." He says, "We spoke to Lou Walters. Lou Walters, Barbara's father, owned
yes.
the Copa."
Barbara
Says-
Walters' father.
Yeah, Lou. Mr.
Yes.
Lou Walters. Says, "Friday's your last day here." I said, "Well, geez, why? I'm trying so hard to do a good job." He says, "Because as of Monday, you are going to be Hoffa's driver." So I says, "I'm what?" He says, "You'll be Hoffa's driver." So I told him, "I don't want to be Hoffa's driver." He says, "Nobody's asking you."
It's not your decision. But you befriended those gangsters by stealing scotch and putting it on their table.
And
They like stolen scotch better than the scotch that came from the bar,
They
or
liked
what?
anything that's stolen that gave them, not the money, because they didn't have it, just the idea, just the thrill of it.
Right.
So I would steal scotch from somebody else's table and bring it over to them.
What did you know about driving a limo or driving a big car?
And well, before I got to New York, my foster brother Roy, he drove big cars, and I used to drive him around sometimes. I wasn't driving him, but I used to drive the cars. So it wasn't hard. The car that I drove Mr. Hoffa in was a big black Cadillac. It wasn't a limo.
Right.
It was a broom, it was a black Cadillac broom.
And he told you when you got in the car, there's 2 sets of rules.
And when he got in the car,
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Yes, when he got in the car.
yeah, he told me, he says he's got rules and he's got cardinal rules. He says if you break a rule, and his 2 bodyguards were in the back with him at the time, he says if you break a rule, he says all that's going to happen is either I'll yell at you or the boys will beat you up. That's all that's going to happen if you break a rule. He says, you break a cardinal rule, you won't be around the next morning. Then he told me, he says, rules are, he says, I don't want to hear a rainstorm, snowstorm, thunderstorm, never want to hear that. You must never be late. He says, after you pick me up, if conditions make us late, that's okay. But I don't want to be kept waiting. He says, can you handle that? So I said, yes, Mr. Hoffa. He says, good. He says, now the cardinal rules is this. I want 100% obedience, 100% loyalty, and what you hear in this car stays in this car. Can you handle that? I said, yes, Mr. Hoffa. He says, that's good, let's go.
I was amazed to read, and you wrote it, that Jimmy Hoffa was not into women. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke cigars.
He was all about business, yeah.
Very moral.
Very
A
all
moral
about business.
guy. What
Not
happened?
always,
Not
good
always.
business, but, crooked business, but business.
And I remember when he disappeared, and we had many theories, as you can imagine. We, we had him buried in a football field underneath the goalpost. What do you think happened to Jimmy Hoffa?
I am 99.99% sure that Mr. Hoffa is in the cornerstone of the concrete at the Renaissance Center Hotel in Detroit, Michigan.
Really? We'll come back and talk more with Adrian Humphreys and Marvin Elkind, known as the Weasel. The book, The Weasel, A Double Life in the Mob, soon to be a movie. Well, let's hope.
That's the